The gunshot that killed Leonard Parks echoed through the dusty streets of Santa Rosa, New Mexico territory, on a sweltering July afternoon in 1878. Townspeople emerged from saloons and shops, gathering around the bloody scene outside the general store where Teresa Alvarez stood, trembling, a smoking pistol still clutched in her hand. "She shot him! The Mexican girl murdered Leonard!" someone shouted from the crowd. Teresa's dark eyes widened with panic as the sheriff approached, his weathered face grim beneath his hat. "I didn't. He was trying to. Please, you must believe me," she stammered, but her words fell on deaf ears as rough hands wrenched the weapon from her grasp. Sheriff Daniels spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Take her to the jail. We'll sort this out before the judge arrives next week." As they dragged her away, Teresa caught sight of a tall stranger at the edge of the crowd. He stood apart from the others, his blue eyes narrowed thoughtfully beneath the brim of a dust-covered hat. Unlike the rest, he didn't shout accusations. He simply watched. 3 days later, Teresa sat on the hard wooden bench in her cell, staring at the small barred window that offered her only glimpse of freedom. The townspeople had already decided her fate. As a Mexican woman in a predominantly white settlement, she had few allies. Leonard Parks had been a businessman with connections, and few questioned the story that she'd murdered him in cold blood. "Miss Alvarez," a deep voice called, startling her from her thoughts. A man stood outside her cell, the same observer from the day of the shooting. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight stubble on his jaw, and the way he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen his share of trouble. "My name is Wade Foster. I'd like to hear your side of what happened." Teresa studied him warily. "Why?" "The whole town believes I'm guilty." He leaned against the bars. "Maybe because I'm not from this town. Or maybe because I watched Parks cheat at cards just last night." "You're a gambler?" "Cattle driver." He removed his hat, revealing sandy hair streaked with gold. "Though I've been known to play a hand or two. Parks wasn't well liked among honest men." Teresa hesitated, then moved closer to the bars. "Mr. Parks, he offered me work at his store when no one else would. But his intentions weren't honorable. When I refused his advances, he became angry." Her voice trembled. "That day, he followed me after work, cornered me behind the store. He had a knife. I fought him off, managed to grab his pistol." She swallowed hard. "It happened so fast." Wade studied her face intently. "Self-defense." "Yes, but who will believe me? I'm just a Mexican girl with no family here." "I believe you?" His words were simple, but carried a weight that made her breath catch. "And I aim to help you prove it." "Why would you help me? You don't know me." A small smile crossed his lips. "Let's just say I've got a problem with seeing innocent people hang." Over the next few days, Wade Foster became a regular visitor to Teresa's cell. He brought her decent food to replace the slop the deputy delivered, clean water, and most precious of all, information. "Parks kept a journal," Wade told her on the 4th day. "His housekeeper mentioned it when I was asking around. If we can find it, it might contain something to help your case." "How will you get it? They won't let you search his home." Wade's smile was grim. "Some skills are better left unmentioned in polite company, Miss Alvarez." That night, under cover of darkness, Wade slipped into Parks's abandoned house through a back window. The place had already been picked over by relatives, but they'd missed the loose floorboard beneath the bed, where Parks had hidden his private journal. Wade found it by accident when the floor creaked oddly under his weight. The journal revealed Parks for what he truly was, a man who preyed on vulnerable women, particularly those of Mexican descent, who had little recourse against him. He'd written about Teresa specifically, detailing his plans to have her one way or another. The entries were damning, painting a picture of a predator, not the upstanding businessman the town believed him to be. The following morning, Wade confronted Sheriff Daniels with the journal. "This changes nothing," the sheriff insisted, reluctantly scanning the pages. "She still shot him." "In self-defense," Wade countered. "You can see his intentions were clear." "A jury might not see it that way, especially not with a Mexican defendant." Wade's jaw tightened. "Then perhaps we need witnesses to corroborate her story." "Good luck finding those," Daniels scoffed. "No one's speaking up for her." But Wade was not deterred. He spent days talking to people across town, particularly the women who worked in Parks's store and neighboring businesses. Most turned away, fearful of involvement. But slowly, a few began to share stories, whispered accounts of Parks' wandering hands, his threatening behavior when rejected, his vindictive nature. Maria Hernandez, who cleaned at the saloon, was the first to agree to speak openly. "He cornered my daughter last year," she told Wade, her eyes downcast. "She was only 16. We left town because of him, only returned when we heard he was dead." She crossed herself. "God forgive me, but I thanked the Virgin when I heard." Wade gathered 6 women with similar stories, each one building a clearer picture of Leonard Parks's true character. But would it be enough? The town was already calling for a hanging, their minds made up before any trial began. Meanwhile, Teresa languished in her cell, her hope waning with each passing day. The women of the town brought her food occasionally, but averted their eyes, as if her alleged crime might be contagious. Only Wade's daily visits gave her strength. "Tell me about your life before Santa Rosa," he asked one evening, sitting on a stool outside her cell. Teresa's smile was sad. "My father was a blacksmith in Tucson, a good man who taught me to ride horses and shoot straight. My mother died when I was young, but she left me her recipes and her rosary. She fingered the wooden beads she kept in her pocket. When Papa died last year, there was nothing left for me there. I thought I could make a new start here." Wade nodded. "My father was a no-good drunk who left us when I was 10. My mother worked herself to death trying to keep our small ranch going. I've been driving cattle since I was 16. And what brought you to Santa Rosa?" "Just passing through with a herd. We delivered them the day before the incident." They fell into a comfortable silence, 2 lonely souls finding unexpected connection through iron bars. The judge arrived in Santa Rosa earlier than expected, a stern man named Judge Hamilton, who had a reputation for swift justice. The trial was set for the following day, leaving Wade scrambling to organize his witnesses. That night, as the town slept, Wade slipped into the jail with the help of the night deputy, a young man named Colton, who wasn't entirely convinced of Teresa's guilt. "You shouldn't be here," Teresa whispered when she saw him. "I needed to tell you what to expect tomorrow," he replied, kneeling beside her cell. "I've found witnesses who will speak about Parks' character, but the judge may not allow their testimony. We need to be prepared for anything." "I am prepared to die," she said softly. "It seems that was my fate the moment I set foot in this town." Wade's hand shot through the bars, catching hers. "Don't talk like that. I won't let them hang you." The intensity in his eyes startled her. In that moment, she realized this man, this stranger who had become her only ally, was risking everything for her. "Why are you doing this, Wade? Truly?" His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Because from the moment I saw you standing there, gun in hand, I knew you weren't a killer." There was fear in your eyes, not malice. He paused. "And maybe because I know what it's like to be alone against the world." Teresa felt something shift between them, a connection deeper than gratitude or compassion. She leaned forward, her forehead touching the cold metal bars. "If I die tomorrow—" "You won't," he interrupted fiercely. "If I do," she continued, "I want you to know that these past days, despite everything, have given me something I never expected to find here. A friend." Wade's eyes softened. "You've found more than a friend, Teresa Alvarez." He hesitated, then leaned forward, his lips meeting hers briefly through the bars. The kiss was gentle, almost tentative, yet it sent warmth spreading through her entire body. "I should go," he whispered, pulling back reluctantly. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." The courtroom was actually the saloon, hastily rearranged with tables pushed aside and chairs arranged in rows. Judge Hamilton presided from behind the bar, his black robes incongruous against the bottles of whiskey behind him. Teresa was led in wearing the same dress she'd been arrested in, now wrinkled and stained. The crowd murmured as she passed, their faces hostile. She kept her head high, drawing on a dignity that impressed even those who despised her. The prosecution presented their case first. Leonard Parks, respected businessman, shot dead in broad daylight by Teresa Alvarez, a Mexican woman new to town. The witness testimonies were damning people who claimed to have seen her argue with Parks earlier that day, who swore she had threatened him previously. When it was Wade's turn to speak for the defense, having appointed himself as such despite no legal training, he approached the makeshift witness stand with Parks' journal in hand. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit this as evidence," he said, placing it before the judge. The prosecutor, a local lawyer named Hargrove, objected immediately. "This is hearsay, Your Honor, and obtained illegally, I might add." Judge Hamilton leafed through the journal briefly, his expression unchanging. "I'll allow it, but its weight as evidence will be determined by its relevance." Wade called his witnesses one by one. Maria Hernandez spoke of Parks' predatory behavior toward her daughter. Eliza Watson, who had worked briefly at Parks' store, described his unwanted advances and threats when she rebuffed him. Each woman's story built upon the last, painting a picture of a man who viewed women, particularly Mexican women, as property to be claimed. The courtroom grew increasingly uncomfortable as the testimonies continued. Many shifted in their seats, unable to meet the eyes of the women speaking. Others grew angry, shouting that the character of the deceased was not on trial. Finally, Wade called Teresa herself. She approached the front of the room, her hands clasped tightly to stop their trembling. In a clear, steady voice, she recounted the events of that day, Parks following her after work, his crude propositions turning to threats, the knife he pulled when she rejected him again, her desperate struggle for the gun. "I never meant to kill him," she concluded, tears finally breaking through her composure. "I only wanted to stop him." The crowd murmured, some sympathetic now, others still skeptical. Judge Hamilton called for closing statements. The prosecutor went first, his argument simple. Regardless of Parks' character, Teresa Alvarez had shot and killed him. The law was clear on the punishment for murder. Then it was Wade's turn. He stood surveying the room filled with townspeople who had already condemned Teresa before hearing a single word of testimony. "I came to Santa Rosa as a stranger, just passing through," he began. "I had no stake in your town or its politics. But when I witnessed what happened that day, I saw something none of you were willing to see: the terror in Miss Alvarez's eyes. Not the cold calculation of a murderer, but the desperate fear of a woman fighting for her life." He moved to stand beside Teresa. "You've heard the testimony today. Leonard Parks was not the man you thought you knew. He preyed on women who couldn't fight back, who had no voice in this community. Teresa Alvarez did what any person would do when faced with violence. She defended herself. And for that, you're ready to hang her." Wade's voice grew stronger. "I ask you, Judge Hamilton, and all of you here today, what kind of justice condemns a woman for refusing to be a victim? What kind of town values the reputation of a dead predator over the life of an innocent woman?" The room was silent as Judge Hamilton considered his ruling. Minutes stretched like hours as Teresa sat, eyes closed, prayer moving silently on her lips. Finally, the judge cleared his throat. "Based on the evidence presented and the testimony of multiple witnesses regarding the character and actions of the deceased, I find the defendant acted in self-defense. Case dismissed." A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by an eruption of voices, some outraged, others relieved. Teresa remained frozen, unable to believe what she'd heard. Wade took her hand. "It's over. You're free." As they left the makeshift courtroom, however, it became clear that legal freedom didn't mean acceptance. Townsfolk glared as they passed, some spitting in the dirt at Teresa's feet. "She may be free, but she's not welcome here," someone called out. Others murmured agreement. Wade felt Teresa stiffen beside him, her newfound freedom already tarnished by the hatred surrounding them. He stopped in the middle of the street, turning to face the crowd that had followed them out. "This woman is innocent," he called out, his voice carrying across the dusty road. "Your courts have declared it so, yet you drive her from her home based on nothing but prejudice." "She killed one of our own," a man shouted. "She defended herself against a predator who happened to be one of your own," Wade countered. "And not one of you stepped forward to protect her, not before Parks attacked her, and not after, when she needed advocates." He looked around at the sea of hostile faces, then down at Teresa beside him. In that moment, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Teresa Alvarez is not leaving Santa Rosa," he announced, "because as of today, she's no longer alone here." Wade dropped to one knee in the dirt, still holding Teresa's hand. The crowd fell silent, confusion replacing anger on many faces. "Teresa," he said, his voice now meant only for her, despite their audience. "I know this is sudden, and God knows it's not how I planned it, but I've come to care for you more than I thought possible in such a short time. I admire your courage, your dignity, and your strength. I can offer you protection as my wife, but more than that, I offer you my heart." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Will you marry me?" Teresa stared down at him, shock written across her features. The proposal was unexpected, perhaps even reckless. They barely knew each other. Yet in the days they'd spent together, they'd shared more truth than many couples did in years. "Wade," she whispered, "you don't have to do this." "I know I don't have to," he replied. "I want to." The crowd watched in stunned silence as Teresa considered his proposal. Finally, a small smile curved her lips. "Yes," she said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I will marry you, Wade Foster." He rose to his feet, facing the townspeople once more. "No one believed her when she claimed innocence," he declared. "Now I stand before this town and say, I do. I believe her, I stand with her, and I will make her my wife." The murmurs that spread through the crowd were different now: surprise, confusion, and in some faces, a reluctant respect. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was a beginning. The impromptu wedding took place that very evening at the small chapel on the edge of town. Father Martinez, one of the few who had shown Teresa kindness during her imprisonment, agreed to perform the ceremony despite the hasty arrangements. Teresa wore a borrowed dress from Maria Hernandez's daughter, simple but clean, with small flowers embroidered around the collar. Wade wore his best shirt, freshly washed and pressed by the hotel owner's wife, who had been moved by his declaration in the street. The church was nearly empty, save for the few women who had testified on Teresa's behalf, and a handful of curious onlookers. But as Teresa walked down the aisle toward Wade, she felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't the wedding she'd dreamed of as a girl, but there was something honest about it, a union built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of life's hardships. "You look beautiful," Wade whispered as she reached him. "And you look nervous," she replied with a small smile. Father Martinez performed the ceremony in both Spanish and English, the familiar words taking on new meaning in the extraordinary circumstances. When Wade slipped a simple gold band onto Teresa's finger, purchased hastily from the general store that had once employed her, his hands were steady. "I pronounce you husband and wife," Father Martinez declared. "May God bless this union formed in unusual circumstances, but, I believe, with sincere hearts." Their first kiss as a married couple was tentative, both acutely aware of their audience. But as Wade's lips met hers, Teresa felt a flutter of something that might, with time, grow into love. The small reception was held at Maria's modest home, where the women had prepared traditional Mexican dishes alongside American fare. Wine flowed freely, and as the evening progressed, the atmosphere lightened. These people, the witnesses who had risked community standing to speak for Teresa, became the foundation of the couple's new social circle. "What happens now?" Teresa asked Wade quietly as they sat together, watching the others talk and laugh. "I've sent word to my crew to continue north without me," he replied. "I have some savings, enough to buy a small plot outside of town, where we could build a place of our own." "You would stay here, after everything?" Wade took her hand. "Running away would only confirm their suspicions about you. Besides," his eyes crinkled with a smile, "I think Santa Rosa could use some shaking up." Later that night, they retreated to Wade's rented room at the boarding house. An awkward silence fell as the door closed behind them. They were strangers in many ways, thrust into intimacy by extraordinary circumstances. "I know this isn't conventional," Wade began, removing his hat and placing it on a hook by the door. Teresa touched his arm, stopping him. "Nothing about us has been conventional, Wade Foster. But I want you to know that I'm grateful, not just for saving my life, but for believing in me when no one else would." "I don't want your gratitude," he said softly. "At least, not only that. What do you want?" "A chance for us to know each other, to build something real from this unusual beginning." Teresa studied his face, seeing the sincerity in his blue eyes. "I want that too." Wade smiled, then gestured to the bed. You should rest. I'll sleep on the floor. That's not necessary, Teresa said, surprising herself with her boldness. We are married, after all. A flush crept up Wade's neck. Are you certain? In answer, Teresa reached up and began unpinning her hair, letting the dark waves fall around her shoulders. Wade watched, transfixed, as she stepped toward him. I have spent days in a cell believing I would die, she said. Tonight, I want to remember that I'm alive. Their first night together was a gentle exploration, each discovering the other with tender curiosity. Wade was patient and attentive, his calloused hands surprisingly delicate as they traced the curves of her body. Teresa, inexperienced but eager, found courage in his obvious admiration. In the quiet aftermath, as moonlight filtered through the thin curtains, Wade held her close against his chest. Tell me something I don't know about you, he murmured into her hair. Teresa thought for a moment. I can ride a horse better than most men. My father taught me when I was young. Wade chuckled. That I'd like to see. What about you? I can play the harmonica, though not very well. And I've never stayed in one place longer than a season. Teresa propped herself up on one elbow. Until now? His finger traced the line of her jaw. Until now. The days following their wedding were a delicate adjustment as they navigated both their new relationship and the town's lingering suspicions. Wade purchased 3 acres of land just outside Santa Rosa, where a small creek provided water and cottonwood trees offered shade. Together, they began building a modest cabin, working side by side from dawn until dusk. Teresa proved to be a hard worker with practical knowledge that surprised Wade. She could drive nails as straight as any man and knew how to mix adobe that would withstand the harsh New Mexico weather. Wade, in turn, showed unexpected skill in planning their small homestead, thinking through details of water access and protection from the elements. Some of the townspeople gradually warmed to the couple. Old Mrs. Winters from the boarding house brought them a quilt as a belated wedding gift. The blacksmith, impressed by Teresa's knowledge inherited from her father, offered Wade a good price on tools. Even Sheriff Daniels tipped his hat when he passed them on the street, a grudging acknowledgement of Wade's devotion to justice. Others remained openly hostile. The general store refused to sell to them, forcing them to ride to the next town for supplies. Anonymous threats were occasionally nailed to their partially built cabin door, but with each passing week, as the scandal faded and new gossip took its place, the hostility diminished. By the time autumn arrived, their cabin was complete, a snug, one-room dwelling with a stone fireplace and windows that caught the morning sun. They'd added a small stable for Wade's horse and the mare he'd purchased for Teresa, along with a chicken coop and a garden plot, where Teresa had already planted vegetables that would winter well. On their 3-month anniversary, Wade surprised Teresa with a special dinner. He'd ridden to the next town for beef and potatoes, even splurging on a bottle of wine. They ate by lantern light at the small table he'd crafted from pine. I have news, he told her as they finished their meal. Sheriff Daniels approached me yesterday. They need deputies and he's offered me a position. Teresa's fork paused midway to her mouth. A deputy? You? I know it's unexpected, but it would mean steady income, and the sheriff admitted that my handling of your case showed a commitment to justice he respected. The same sheriff who was ready to see me hang? Wade reached across the table for her hand. People can change, Teresa. He's acknowledging he was wrong about you, about us. She considered this. And you want to accept? Not without your blessing. I know it would mean working alongside men who once condemned you. Teresa set down her fork, thinking. Finally, she nodded. Take the position. Show them what real justice looks like. Wade squeezed her hand. I have something else for you. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small package wrapped in brown paper. It's not much, but... Teresa unwrapped it to find a silver pendant on a delicate chain, a small, intricately designed rose. It's beautiful, she breathed. I saw it and thought of you. Beautiful, yet strong enough to bloom in this harsh land. She came around the table and sat in his lap, the pendant clutched in her hand. I have something to tell you, too. Wade looked up at her, curious. I'm with child, she said softly. The doctor confirmed it yesterday. His eyes widened, then filled with a joy so pure it brought tears to Teresa's eyes. His hand moved to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "A child," he whispered. "Our child." Teresa nodded, her own joy mixed with fear. "I worry about raising a child here, where people might never fully accept us." Wade pressed his forehead to hers. "Our child will grow up knowing their mother is the strongest, bravest woman in the territory. And together, we'll make sure they never face the prejudice you did." As winter settled over Santa Rosa, Wade began his duties as deputy. The position earned him respect among some townspeople who previously avoided him. Teresa, meanwhile, prepared for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and transforming one corner of their cabin into a nursery. Their peaceful routine was disrupted in February when a fierce winter storm blew in, trapping Wade in town for 3 days. Teresa managed alone, keeping the fire going and caring for their animals through howling winds and blinding snow. When Wade finally made it home, he found her exhausted but triumphant. "I was worried sick about you," he admitted, brushing snow from his coat. "Sheriff Daniels had to physically restrain me from trying to reach you during the worst of it." "I'm stronger than I look," she reminded him, helping him out of his frozen boots. That night, as they lay in bed listening to the wind, Wade's hand rested protectively over her growing belly. "I felt the baby move today," Teresa told him, guiding his hand to a spot just below her ribs. "Right here." They waited in silence until, sure enough, there was a definite kick against Wade's palm. His face lit with wonder. "That's amazing," he whispered. "I've been thinking about names," Teresa said. "If it's a boy, perhaps William, after your grandfather you told me about. And if it's a girl, Magdalena, after my mother." Wade nodded, pressing a kiss to her temple. Perfect either way. As spring returned to New Mexico territory, Teresa's time grew near. The women who had stood by her during the trial now rallied around her in preparation for the birth. Maria Hernandez promised to serve as midwife, having delivered countless babies over the years. Eliza Watson, now courting the town's young schoolteacher, sewed a beautiful christening gown. Even some of the women who had previously shunned Teresa began to soften, the universal bond of motherhood overcoming old prejudices. Mrs. Hawkins, the banker's wife, who once crossed the street to avoid Teresa, stopped her outside the church one Sunday to offer advice about colic and teething. Wade, watching these interactions with quiet satisfaction, noted how Teresa's obvious joy in her impending motherhood was slowly changing perceptions. It was harder to view her as a cold-blooded killer while she radiated maternal warmth, her hands constantly cradling her rounded belly as she chatted with other women about cradles and swaddling techniques. "You've won them over," he observed as they walked home from church. Teresa smiled. "Not all of them, but enough." On a warm day in early May, with wildflowers painting the hillsides in vibrant colors, Teresa went into labor. Wade rode frantically for Maria, then paced outside their bedroom as the women worked inside. Hours passed, the sun setting and rising again as Teresa's labor progressed. "It's taking too long," Wade fretted to Eliza, who had come to help. "Is she all right?" "First babies often take their time," Eliza reassured him. "Maria is the best midwife in the territory. Try to rest." But rest was impossible. Wade continued his pacing until, near noon of the second day, a thin, angry wail pierced the air. He froze, heart hammering in his chest. Minutes later, Maria emerged, her lined face weary but smiling. "You have a son, Deputy Foster, strong and healthy with his mother's eyes." Wade sagged against the wall in relief. "And Teresa?" "Tired but well. Go meet your boy." The sight of Teresa cradling their newborn son was one Wade knew he would carry to his grave. She looked up as he entered, her face drawn with exhaustion, but radiant with joy. "William Wade Foster," she said softly as Wade knelt beside the bed. 8 pounds of pure stubbornness. He was determined to take his time. Wade touched his son's tiny head with trembling fingers. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and, when he opened them briefly, eyes that already showed hints of Teresa's deep brown. "He's perfect," Wade whispered, overcome. "Would you like to hold him?" Carefully, as if handling the most fragile treasure in the world, Wade took his son in his arms. The weight of him, so small yet so substantial, brought tears to his eyes. "Hello, William," he murmured. "I'm your father." The baby yawned, tiny fingers flexing against the swaddling blanket. "I think he approves," Teresa said, smiling tiredly. In the days that followed, their small cabin became a place of quiet wonder as they adjusted to life with an infant. Wade took time away from his deputy duties, chopping extra firewood so Teresa wouldn't have to worry about it, preparing simple meals, and learning the intricacies of changing and bathing their son. The christening at the church 3 weeks later marked a turning point in their acceptance by the community. The small chapel was surprisingly full, with faces that had once shown only contempt, now softened by the universal appeal of new life. Father Martinez blessed little William, his words about new beginnings and forgiveness clearly meant for the congregation as much as the child. Afterward, many approached to offer congratulations and small gifts, a hand-carved rattle, knitted booties, a tiny silver spoon. Sheriff Daniels himself presented them with a rocking horse, explaining gruffly that his own sons had outgrown it. "Seems the town has finally decided to accept you," Wade observed as they walked home, Teresa carrying the sleeping baby while Wade balanced the various gifts. "A child changes things," Teresa replied. "People see us differently now, not as the Mexican woman who shot Parks and the cowboy who defended her, but as parents, as a family." "Family," Wade repeated, savoring the word. "I never thought I'd have one of my own." Teresa adjusted William's blanket against the spring breeze. "When I was in that cell, certain I would die, I couldn't imagine this future. You gave me that, Wade, a second chance." "We gave it to each other," he corrected gently. As William grew from infant to toddler, the foster family became an established part of Santa Rosa. Wade's position as deputy brought stability and respect, while Teresa's garden flourished into a small business as she sold vegetables and herbs in the town market. Their cabin expanded with an additional room for William and a proper kitchen, where Teresa experimented with combining her mother's Mexican recipes with American cooking techniques. Her chili and cornbread became famous throughout the county, often requested for community gatherings. When William was 2, Teresa discovered she was expecting again. The second pregnancy was easier than the first, her body knowing the way. The birth, too, came quicker, with little Elena Magdalena Foster arriving on a snowy December night after only 6 hours of labor. "She has your eyes," Teresa told Wade as he held his daughter for the first time, "and your impatience." Wade laughed, captivated by the tiny girl with wisps of light brown hair and eyes that already showed hints of his blue. "She's going to be trouble, this one. I can tell already." William, now a sturdy toddler with his mother's dark curls and a vocabulary that mixed English and Spanish with cheerful abandon, peered curiously at his new sister. "Baby small," he pronounced seriously. "She'll grow," Wade assured him, ruffling his son's hair. "Just like you did." The town's reaction to their second child was markedly different from the first. Where William's birth had been a tentative turning point in their acceptance, Elena's arrival was celebrated widely. The women of Santa Rosa organized a proper baby shower, bringing gifts and food to welcome the newest foster. Even Leonard Parks' widow, who had returned to town the previous year, brought a handmade quilt with no trace of the bitterness many had expected. By the time Elena was walking, the events that had brought Wade and Teresa together had become something of a local legend embellished in the telling, transformed into a romance rather than the desperate circumstances it had truly been. Few remembered or chose to recall the hatred that had nearly cost Teresa her life. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Wade took Teresa riding to the spot where he'd first proposed building their home. The land had flourished under their care, the vegetable garden expanded, fruit trees beginning to bear, a small herd of goats providing milk and cheese. Their children played under the watchful eye of Mariah's granddaughter, now their regular helper. "Did you ever imagine this?" Wade asked as they sat beneath a cottonwood tree, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset paint the distant mesas gold and crimson. Teresa leaned against his shoulder. "Never. When I came to Santa Rosa, I was just looking to survive. I never expected to find happiness here." "Are you? Happy?" She turned to face him, her hand coming up to cup his cheek, now sporting a neatly trimmed beard streaked with the first hints of gray. "More than I ever thought possible." Wade covered her hand with his own. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you. Something I should have said a long time ago." Teresa waited, a question in her eyes. "That day in the street, when I proposed, it wasn't just about protecting you. It wasn't even mostly about that." His voice grew soft. "I think I fell in love with you the first time I visited your cell, when you were so afraid but still held your head high. I just didn't know how to say it then." Teresa's eyes glistened. "And now? Now I'm saying it. I love you, Teresa Foster, not because of duty or circumstance, but because of who you are: brave, kind, stronger than anyone I've ever known." She leaned forward, kissing him with a tenderness that still held the power to make his heart race after 5 years. "I love you too. I think I have since you believed me when no one else would." As they rode home in the gathering dusk, Teresa glanced at the town of Santa Rosa spread out below them, the place that had nearly destroyed her, then became the setting for a life she cherished. The evening lights twinkled in windows, smoke curled from chimneys, and the church bell rang for evening service. "We should invite everyone for a proper celebration," she suggested as their cabin came into view, lamplight glowing warmly in the windows. "For our anniversary?" Wade raised an eyebrow. "Everyone, even old Hargrove who tried to have you convicted?" Teresa laughed. "Even him. It's time to truly put the past behind us, don't you think?" The anniversary party was held 2 weeks later. The Foster homestead transformed with lanterns strung between trees, tables laden with food, and music provided by a local trio that included Wade on his much-improved harmonica. Nearly the entire town attended, from Sheriff Daniels, now gray-haired but still imposing, to the youngest children, who played tag around the property under the moonlight. William, now 5 and fiercely protective of his 3-year-old sister, proudly showed visitors the goat he had helped raise from a kid. Elena charmed everyone with her precocious speech and the blue eyes that matched her father's. As the evening progressed, Father Martinez called for attention. "I think it appropriate," he said, raising his glass, "to offer a toast to Wade and Teresa Foster, whose unusual beginning has blossomed into one of the strongest marriages I've had the privilege to witness." The crowd murmured agreement, glasses lifting. 5 years ago, the priest continued, they stood before God under difficult circumstances. Today, they stand before us as beloved members of this community, a testament to faith, forgiveness, and the power of love to transform lives. "To the Fosters," someone called, and the crowd echoed the sentiment. Teresa, standing with Wade's arm around her waist, felt tears prick her eyes at the genuine warmth in the faces surrounding them. The journey from accused murderer to respected townswoman had been long and often painful, but in this moment, it felt complete. Later, as the party wound down and their guests departed, Wade found Teresa sitting on their porch swing, watching the last of the lanterns burn low. "Happy?" he asked, settling beside her. She nodded, leaning into his embrace. "I was thinking about how differently things might have turned out. If you hadn't been there that day, if you hadn't believed me." Wade pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'm grateful every day that I was there, that I trusted my instincts about you. Our children will grow up in a town that accepts them," Teresa mused. "Not like the world you and I knew." "They'll have challenges of their own," Wade replied. "But they'll face them knowing their parents overcame worse." Inside the cabin, William called out in his sleep. Teresa rose to check on him, Wade following close behind. They found their son tangled in his blankets, murmuring about goats. Elena slept peacefully in her small bed across the room, one arm wrapped around the rag doll Teresa had made her. As they tucked William back in, smoothing his dark curls from his forehead, Teresa felt the familiar swell of love and gratitude that had become the foundation of her life. This family, this man who had risked everything for a stranger, these children who carried both their heritages in their small bodies, was a miracle she never took for granted. Outside again, beneath a sky scattered with stars, Wade pulled Teresa close. "What are you thinking about now?" She smiled up at him. "About how sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to everything good that follows. Like a shooting that leads to a wedding? Exactly like that." She rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I wouldn't change a thing, Wade Foster. Not one moment of our journey." He tilted her chin up, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Nor would I, Mrs. Foster. Nor would I." They remained on the porch long after the last guest had departed, the silence of the New Mexico night wrapping around them like a familiar blanket. Tomorrow would bring chores and responsibilities, children to tend and work to complete. But tonight was for remembering the extraordinary path that had brought them here, a path that began with an accusation and a defense, with no one believing her innocence except the cowboy who stood before the town and said, "I do." As they finally went inside, closing the door on the quiet land that had become their home, both knew with certainty that the story that had begun in violence and desperation had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to courage, to justice, and to love that blooms in the most unlikely soil. And in the years that followed, as their family grew and Santa Rosa flourished around them, the tale of Wade and Teresa Foster became part of local lore, a reminder that sometimes the greatest loves are forged in the harshest fires, and that second chances, when grasped with both hands, can lead to lives more meaningful than either could have imagined alone.